recording. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our presentation, Sex Positivity for Older Adults in Assisted Living Settings and Their Partners. This presentation is brought to you by Jennifer Bone, Christopher Neuheimer, Ellen Orsi, and Stacy Plichter-Keller. The target population for our program are adults aged 65 and over with mild cognitive impairment or progressive cognitive deficits who reside in assisted living facilities and their intimate partners. There are roughly 33,000 assisted living homes in the US with about 1 million residents, and about 440,000 of these residents have mild to moderate cognitive deficits.
Developmental level. This in-person sex education program is for the older adults with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. It is tailored for those who can communicate their desires and who are self-reliant enough to live in an assisted living facilities, as opposed to nursing homes. Those with mild dementia begins with difficulty managing daily life skills, such as remembering to pay bills or shutting off appliances. Moderate to severe dementia involves difficulty with tasks such as getting dressed, fixing meals, and feeding oneself. Those with mild cognitive impairment there's at least 13 subtypes. What they share in common is that the person will begin to have noticeable decline in their memory, attention, and cognitive abilities, while noticeable mild cognitive impairment does not interfere with day-to-day living skills. As key issue for our population is that decision-making and thus understanding consent is affected by mild cognitive impairment. As the impairment progresses, the ability of the person affected to solve problems, plan, and have foresight are affected, making it difficult to process choices and understand consequences of their decisions or actions. People with mild to moderate cognitive impairment have reduced capacity and impaired judgment. Reduced capacity is when a person does not understand situations or actions and has a difficult time reasoning and communicating. Impaired judgment is when a person is unable to understand what the risks are for situations and decisions. Vulnerability is an area that many suffer from, as well as this puts them at risk of exploitation.
So why assisted living facilities? Well, like we said, there's roughly 330,000 of them, 1 million residents. Many have mild to moderate cognitive deficits. Sexual activity is very common in this setting. Older adults are sexual beings, but there are very few educational interventions and training resources available for either the residents or the staff. So the rationale for our program is that there's research showing that while sexual activity declines somewhat in older adults, many older adults remain sexually active. And there are issues specific to older adults living in assisted living facilities. First is the issue of consent for people with mild cognitive deficits. Second is that biological and physiological changes can make having sex more challenging. There's a risk of sexually transmitted infections, and in fact, there are high rates of STIs in assisted living and nursing home facilities. There's the issue of finding privacy in these facilities. And finally, there are relationship complications that happen when folks live in a closed system. Overall, this program seeks to support the right of older adults to be fully sexual beings and engage in sexual expression.
So for some of our program learning objectives, these are the goals that we want participants to reach by the end of our 4-session program. In session 1, we're going to focus on consent and pleasure. Participants will practice how to ask and affirm for consent and also how to recognize when consent isn't present. In session 2, we're going to be covering topics like sexual health and aging bodies, where the aim is for participants to understand their safe sex practices and explore strategies that enhance sexual pleasure as our bodies change with age. In session 3, we're going to be talking about relationships and jealousy, where participants will learn to identify jealousy triggers and practice communication tools to express their emotions in healthier ways. Finally, in session 4, we'll close with communication and context. Participants will think about appropriate times and places for intimacy in assisted living and learn redirection strategies for when behaviors might be inappropriate in different contexts. These objectives are especially important for older adults because sexuality doesn't end with age. Many residents in assisted living remain sexually active or want to be, yet face unique challenges such as changing bodies, stigmas, and sometimes reduced capacity for decision making. By focusing on consent, communication, and safe expression, this program supports the dignity, well being, and healthy intimacy of older people later in life.
So the modality and the length of the program. The program consists of 4 one-hour in-person sessions. Both the older person with the mild cognitive impairment and their partner or partners, if they have them, will be invited and welcomed. The sessions will be a mix of didactic information and interactive activities. Participants will receive short pamphlets that they can refer to for later, including checklists and a consent card. Recordings of the session material will be made available in online formats suitable for smartphones. The program formatting, all 4 sessions will generally have the same structure. There'll be an introduction, an icebreaker, some short didactic information, and so breakout sessions with interactive activities will be interspersed throughout the hour. The goal is to make the programming fun and interesting and not intimidating. We're keeping it short because older folks with mild cognitive impairment may fatigue or not be able to keep focused for a long time, and we're doing it in person so that people can interact with us, and if they have any questions, they can be answered at the time. The overall plan is to have 4 sessions. The first session is sexual pleasure and consent. The second session is sexual health. The third session is navigating relationships and jealousy. And the fourth session is teaching and practicing communication.
In this first session, I'll be focusing on both the idea of consent and the importance of pleasure. For older adults, it's especially important to normalize the fact that sexual desire does not disappear with age. Pleasure and intimacy remain a meaningful part of life. So we'll work on increasing participants' understanding of consent, especially in the context of aging and mild cognitive changes. This means not just helping them practice say yes or no, but also communicating their needs clearly and recognizing when consent is or isn't present. And you can see that these session goals align with that objective. So moving into the next slide. So in this 60-minute session, I will start with a warm-up. We're going to also remind the group of confidentiality. From there, we're going to do an exercise where we have one word that we associate with pleasure later in life, and slides that I will be kind of presenting alongside these sessions. They are very simple with different words that prompt ideas. So keeping things very simple and straightforward for our audience. From there, we'll transition into discussing the ways that sexuality is part of a lifelong well-being and life worth living. And introducing today's topic, consent and pleasure. From there, we're going to be discussing teaching consent through the Fry's model, which means that consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Next slide, please. And from there, we're going to do an activity with hugs and consent, in which a partner is instructed to ask their partner for a hug, and then they can say yes, no, or change or revoke that consent. From there, discussing as small groups and as a large group, what felt easy in the activity, what felt difficult, how can we make asking for consent feel more organic? How can we make asking for consent be something of pleasure? From there, we'll break out into small group activities and discuss things about partner safety. How do you know when you feel safe, when your partner feels safe? And finally, wrap up with comments, questions, and giving the participants a consent card that they can take home that has a picture of the Fry's model, so we can have just an easy association with consent with the image of fries. So finally, to wrap up, another big piece of this is talking about respect and safety. And it means talking about openly about how consent protects not only the individual, but the relationship by making sure that intimacy feels good for everybody involved.
So in the second session, we're going to actually talk about how do you have safe and fun sex. And here we'll get into some details. Some of the goals will be to help folks identify the sexual organs and their basic parts, to explain how arousal works, to describe risks from unprotected sex, to demonstrate on models how to have safer sex, condoms, dental dams. We'll talk about clean sex toys. We won't have demo models for those. And to describe how to have enjoyable sex with an older body, addressing issues of lubrication, medication, alternatives to intercourse. This should take about 60 minutes, and the materials needed are the PowerPoints and some short videos, demonstration objects. We'll have a vaginal model, a penile model, a penis model, condoms, dental dams, and lubricants, hand wipes, handouts, flip chart markers, and posters. And this is what some of the materials will look like. The posters will be hanging in the room before folks get there. A lot of people don't necessarily know, especially what the female anatomy looks like, and this will give them a chance to look and to explore in a way that's safe. So before folks arrive, the posters will be up. We'll do a short welcome. We'll review consent very briefly, the Fries model from last week. We'll remind folks about confidentiality, that they can certainly share what they learned, but to please not share individual stories people talk about. We'll have an icebreaker next because people are awkward talking about sex, but talking about sex to your partner or partners is a key part of both consent and both having an enjoyable experience. So we'll lead with a discussion of what are some fun names for sex and private parts from when they were younger. This is an exercise that folks generally seem to enjoy. We'll have people call them out. The facilitator will write them down. And then we'll ask the more serious question, what are some challenges older people face around having sex? And then, after we get some of those out, we'll do a short introduction to the topic of safe and fun sex. For safer sex, there'll be a short PowerPoint presentation on anatomy and arousal. And then we'll pass around the models while talking so people can really touch and see what do our body parts look like. We'll then have a video on sexual health and STIs. And then we'll get into pairs or triplets, depending on how many folks are there. And we'll demonstrate putting condoms on penis models. We'll talk about discussion dams. We'll have them out, but there's not really a way to demonstrate them. For the second part, we'll start talking, now that we've covered safe, let's cover fun, right? So we'll talk about sex advice for seniors. There's a great video series we'll introduce the participants to. We'll have people pair or in triples model using words and body language to tell a partner what they like or don't like. Doesn't necessarily have to be their partner for this. And we'll stress the importance of stopping if it feels bad for you or your partner, or if anybody has pain, and that it's okay to stop. And then we'll talk about, I'll have a guided group discussion, like how do you find out what you like? And we'll have people talk in groups of 3 or so. Then from there, we'll go into an activity where we'll have the pairs or triplets explore the different lubricants. Each pair will get their own set of 3 different kinds, silicone, border-based, gel-based. We'll have people rate the lube, and we'll provide wipes for after. We'll close by soliciting comments and questions, and we'll give out pamphlets and samples.
And after discussing safe and fun sex, we go into navigating relationships and jealousy. The needs out of a relationship are going to change over time. So our goals are going to be to articulate emotional and physical needs towards our partners, explain the emotional stakes of vulnerability found in those new relationships, and describe what a new relationship looks like in this environment and life stage, and then demonstrating an ability to identify and communicate about sources of jealousy to their partners. So to start the session, like always, we will review confidentiality and introduce the topic for the week. The first discussion that we would have is about what are some of the things that they are looking for in a relationship. Everyone is looking for something different, but there are going to be things that are common ground. So we likely start by developing a word cloud, such as the one on the right. And after that discussion, we'd go into what are some of the warning signs of feeling jealousy, the other half of a relationship that you can feel intimate about. Um, as we're discussing that, that'll go into our presentation of addressing jealousy constructively with emotional vulnerability. That would take about 10 minutes. And then at the end of that, there'd be about a 5 minute time period where we can practice constructively, emotionally vulnerable communication. And then part two, a jealousy self-reflection. It recounts how jealousy has looked and sounded uh, to them in the past, if they've experienced it, and they probably have. Um, and just as a way of helping them reflect and be mindful of how they themselves might also be acting. And then afterwards, for homework, we're going to have them start thinking about how public you would want to be with your partner.
All right, then moving on to session 4, the goals: making public your relationship, yes or no, appropriate sexual behavior, understanding social contact, redirecting strategies, and addressing boredom and loneliness. This section is pretty much an open forum where it is available to where it's a communication thing. So for mostly, it is going to just be talking about how you feel and understanding about, where you can do things, where you can't do it. And then the fact of, do you want to be open or closed with your relationship? Do you want your family to know about the person that you're having a sexual relationship or not? Next slide, please. Icebreaker. How do you feel about sex at your age? So a lot of people have this misconception that, you get to a certain age and you no longer have an interest or you no longer have sex. It's just kind of done and over with. You did that in your younger years. So this one is to find out about how they feel about it. Then whether or not, how you defined your sexual relationship. Would you like to share with your family or others about your relationship? What if you end up in a throuple with 3 people or more than one person at your assisted living, which is likely because there is more women than there are men in there. So a lot of times, they don't want their families to know, their immediate families to know. Then there's often the times where, the women are fighting over the men. So many times they don't really want anyone to share. Then moving on to appropriate sexual behavior. When is sex appropriate? Where is it appropriate? A lot of people, have their own room. If they don't have their own room, they need to be asking the staff, can they have a private room provided for them? Not to just doing it in the normal living area or the dining area type thing, or hide off into the laundry room. It's not appropriate at those times. Or hey, let's go in the middle of breakfast. So to make sure that it's understood where and when it's appropriate. So understanding social context, noticing your environment. Where are you? Who's around you? Communicating your desires in the correct environment. This can be, letting someone know, hey, would you like to get together later? Or maybe even, maybe we should have a private dinner in your apartment or your room type thing. Don't just go willy-nilly pretty much in front of everybody. It's a private affair. Redirecting strategy, managing inappropriate behaviors, exposing self, grabbing others. This also involves pretty much trying to have sex in front of other people. A lot of people with dementia really do not have a full understanding of their boundaries at all times. And even kind of when it gets close to sundowning, at the end of the day, we kind of get a little confused. Other forms of affection, holding hands, hugging, light touches. just sitting in and speaking to somebody face to face instead of a whole group is another form of infection. Addressing boredom and loneliness. What to do when you're bored? What do you do when you're lonely? There's other social situations like games, movies, and other activities. This is a time where, it's not always the perfect time to have, sex. And, it's the right time, right place, right person at that time. So it's important to know, where your boundaries are. And that's another thing, is setting your boundaries. Moving on to the last part of this is the open floor at the end of the closing. Is there anything that you would like to discuss on what has been gone over? Do you have any questions? Anything that you were afraid to ask during those other 3 weeks previous this? Any kind of how to express yourself in a different manner. The whole point is being comfortable, not being belittled or be made to feel bad for how you feel, being a sexual person. That's it for the end of the 4th session.
So moving on to the ethical and cultural considerations. In designing a sex education program for older adults with mild cognitive impairment, it's going to be important to address both ethical and cultural factors. Ethically, consent is central, but it can shift with age and cognitive changes, so capacity must be assessed continuously. We also want to balance client safety with well-being, recognizing that intimacy is a part of self-expression and happiness. Accessibility is key. Materials should use clear language and large print, and privacy must be protected at all times. Culturally, we're pushing back against ageism and ableism, which often erase the sexuality of older adults or those with disabilities. We also need to be mindful of diverse cultural and religious beliefs and intentionally affirm LGBTQIA+ older adults who often face double marginalization. Finally, families may feel conflicted about their loved one's sexuality, so we have to navigate those dynamics carefully while centering the rights of the residents themselves. And to evaluate our program, we plan on doing a couple different evaluation methods, considering that there may be varying levels of cognitive impairment with our participants. And this would ensure that we get like a vast array of data. So we want to do a pre and post survey with 3 simple statements using a Likert scale. Um, very simple. I know what consent is. I know how to practice safe sex. I understand how to tell if my partner is safe. And from there, we'll also provide a facilitator observation checklist that align with our learning objectives. So the facilitators can also kind of do a survey themselves of what the participants seem to be taking in and taking away, so that we can then modify our course in the future to be more fit for the population. And then finally, throughout the session, we'll have participant reflections, which the facilitators will also document so we can get that type of data as well.
So there are a number of resources here that we provided for folks who, if you want to implement this program yourself. Planned Parenthood has the What is Consent Fries model. We have information on defining consent, animation, an ethical model for consenting cognitively impaired adults. The short videos, Sex Advice for Seniors, can be found at this site. And finally, the anatomy models can be purchased from numerous sites, but this is simply one of them. And here are the references that we used. We'll post the slides, so feel free to peruse them. And we'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation.